It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Dr. Michael Ozner. Hello, Dr. Ozner. How are you?
Hello. Nice to be with you, Douglas.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it. See, you're a cardiologist, and you've got 4 books that you've written?
4 books. That's correct.
Okay. Are we going to talk a little bit about each one, or do you want to focus on one particular book?
Well, my latest book is, I think, the most exciting because we finally have gotten to the point in cardiovascular medicine where we can significantly reduce the likelihood of somebody dying from a heart attack or a stroke. And that's the book that was recently published called Heart Attacks Are Not Worth Dying For.
Okay, is this a breakthrough in technology that you're going to talk about?
Yes, actually it is. And, we've always recommended healthy lifestyle to patients, with healthy diet, regular exercise, smoking cessation, stress management, good sleep, and all of that. But despite that, we still have cardiovascular disease, which is a term that encompasses both heart attack and stroke, is still the leading cause of death in the United States and worldwide. So it, I think, is imperative that we try to find other modalities to lower the risk of death and disability from this dreaded disease. And then along came the statins. These were medications that were used. We've had statins for decades, and most people are familiar with these drugs. These are drugs like atorvastatin, rosuvastatin, or Crestor, and a whole variety. There's about 4 or 5 of them out there, and they were very effective. They lowered cholesterol levels by about 40 up to 50%, and they lowered the risk of heart attacks and cardiovascular death significantly by about 25%. So we made great strides starting in the mid-'80s with these drugs, in addition to lifestyle intervention for those that needed it. The problem was that it only lowered the risk of death by using statins about 25%. Well, that meant 75% of people would still die despite taking these medications. And we certainly have been looking and doing clinical research, trying to find better approaches to prevent this disease. And I think that over the past 10 years, and especially over the past 5 years, it was through genetics and genetic engineering that we've developed medications that in select individuals who are walking around with high cholesterol levels and other risk factors that we can discuss in their bloodstream, have been able to take these numbers down to levels that heretofore we have never seen before. And that has translated into not only a significant reduction in the number of people having heart attacks and dying from heart attacks and strokes, but also it has resulted in having the ability now to take young people who haven't had heart attacks or haven't had the risk factors that most people when they get into their mid-40s, 50s, and beyond get, and treat them so that they don't develop this dreaded disease that, again, is a leading cause of death. I mean, in the United States alone, we're talking about over 840,000 deaths per year of heart attack and stroke. And this encompasses more than 640,000 heart attacks and 140,000 or more strokes and peripheral vascular catastrophes. And this is why we now can say that we are gaining ground on this ferocious beast. I like to say that we're taking this ferocious beast, cardiovascular disease, and we can now reduce it into a harmless pussycat. And it's through this new approach, a groundbreaking new approach, that we're able to accomplish this.
So is cardiovascular disease something that people can be genetically predisposed to rather than exclusively to lifestyle?
That's a very good point. That's a very good point, because people like to think that, well, if I just, follow a healthy lifestyle, which we all, as cardiologists, that's the first step, is to tell people to, and we could talk about nutrition, what's a healthy nutrition, what's a healthy amount of exercise to get every day, avoid obesity, and do all those things that we recommend. But the problem is you could do all those things and still drop dead from a heart attack. A good example that I like to give is the marathon runner years ago, the name Jim Fix.
I remember that.
I don't know if you remember that name, but he was the picture of health. He ran marathons. He wrote books on exercise and preventing heart disease, and he dropped dead from a heart attack while running, sudden cardiac death. And everybody was aghast. But when they did the autopsy, his arteries were full of this atherosclerotic plaque that I'll talk about. And so the question is, why is that? Well, certainly we have to take genetics or inherited risk factors into account. And some people, despite the fact that they follow a healthy lifestyle, can still walk around with very high cholesterol levels and levels of other different types of lipids, that we call it, that lead to this process. So the good news is we couldn't do much about the severe inherited risk factors before. Now we can. We could treat it. We have medications that can treat that, along with treating people that really, they don't follow the perfect lifestyle. They gain weight. We have an overweight and obesity epidemic in this country. We have a diabetes epidemic in this country. And all of these things fuel the flames of atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, namely heart attack and stroke. Now, one of the things, so that everybody understands what we're talking about here, and I'm going to make this as very simple, because it's not complicated, is this term atherosclerosis. That's a fancy term that simply means a collection of fatty deposits in the artery wall. And what happens is that cholesterol and triglycerides, these are two types of fats, when they travel in the bloodstream, need to be carried. They can't travel by themselves. They're what we call hydrophobic. So they're carried in these little particles called lipoproteins. And I liken these lipoproteins almost to like little cars that are coursing through our vascular highways. And when there's too many of them, guess what? They take the exit ramp right into the vascular wall, the blood vessel wall, and they develop what's called a plaque, which is a collection of these fatty deposits. And I make the analogy, it's like a pimple in our artery wall. And just like a pimple that gets highly inflamed, it can pop or rupture. The problem is in the vascular wall, when these collection of fats, which we call an atherosclerotic plaque, when that ruptures, we get blood coming into this plaque, and it develops a clot, and we shut down the blood flow in that artery. And if it's an artery in the heart, we develop a sudden heart attack, often associated with sudden cardiac death. If it's an artery in the brain that develops an atherosclerotic plaque, we get a sudden and catastrophic stroke. So it really is imperative that we decrease the number of these particles, and which was a really difficult thing to do years ago, because some people, again, either because they were not compliant with a healthy lifestyle, or they had inherited risk factors. We could not get their cholesterol levels and other levels that I will talk about low enough to be able to not only stop the formation of these atherosclerotic plaques, but believe it or not, we can now achieve regression or shrinkage of these plaques for those that are there and get rid of them. And the analogy I like to make is what the gastroenterologists are doing to lower the risk of colon cancer. They go in every so many years and they'll do a colonoscopy. And if they see a polyp, they'll snip it out before it becomes cancerous, so as to decrease the risk of colorectal cancer. Well, in essence, we have the ability to go after these plaques that I talked about, these pimples in the artery wall, if you will, and decrease the size of them, and in many cases, especially if we get there early enough, what we call early soft plaques, completely eradicate or eliminate these plaques so as they don't get more advanced and inflammatory plaques that rupture later on in life, causing catastrophic heart attacks and death.
How do you go about detecting the plaques in people? Is that
excellent question?
Is that done with blood
question.
tests or EKGs or both, or how do you do it?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So the first thing, before I answer that question, I'll tell you, when did these plaques form? And it used to be, well, you didn't see these plaques until men got into their 40s and 50s, and women usually follow, having these plaques develop post-menopause in their 50s and beyond. And what we have learned is that these plaques begin, believe it or not, in childhood and early adolescence. And we know that one of the pivotal studies was the Korean War study, where they took troops who unfortunately were killed in action, these mean age of 22 years old, and they did autopsies on them, and they looked in the coronary arteries, and nearly 80% of them had atherosclerotic plaques at that young age, mean age of 22. And so we now know, and other studies have been done to show that this disease starts in childhood and progresses. And so it is important, especially when we start to say, how are we going to attack this, is start in childhood. Now, we don't put children on intensive medications, with the certain rare exceptions, but we certainly need to start with a healthy lifestyle with children, and that includes healthy nutrition, regular exercise, and the like. And when we get into the adolescent age group and beyond, early adulthood, we need to be more proactive in preventing this disease that, again, is the leading cause of death, not only in men, but also in women across the United States and worldwide. And so how do we become proactive instead of reactive? Because right now, in many respects, we're reactive. We wait till people have heart attacks, and then we try to spring into action and right the ship. The problem is, most half the people with heart attacks don't even make it to the hospital. Yeah. They'll die of sudden cardiac death. And so what we have learned is that we can image the coronary arteries, and clearly the best form of looking inside the arteries is a test called CTA, which is computerized tomography angiography, which is a fancy term. It's an X-ray test that could actually very specifically outline how many of these plaques do you have in your arteries, and then if you treat it, you could see these things regress and go away. Now, one of the advances has also been made in imaging, because clearly we don't want to be putting people through expensive X-ray tests that carry radiation exposure to it. So we're now, in many respects, also using ultrasound imaging, Ultrasound has no radiation associated with it. It's very inexpensive, and it takes a very short amount of time to image the carotid arteries in the neck or the peripheral arteries in the legs to see if there are these plaques forming. Because if we see plaques, these atherosclerotic plaques that I'm talking about, in, say, the arteries in the legs, we know the likelihood of those plaques being elsewhere in the coronary arteries and the cerebral arteries is very great. And that's where we like to be very aggressive in lowering the cholesterol levels. And by the way, the cholesterol levels, and specifically the LDL cholesterol. Many people have heard the LDL cholesterol is so-called bad cholesterol. But the fact of the matter is that we know that it's a marker of how many of these particles are floating around the bloodstream. So if we can lower those LDL cholesterol levels to a level that's very low, we can actually eliminate these early plaques in early adulthood. And for people later in life, if we aggressively lower those levels, we can maybe not completely eradicate the plaques that they have, and I'm talking about 50-year-olds and 60-year-olds and beyond, but we can shrink those plaques, those fatty deposits in the arteries that are the root cause of heart attacks and strokes, down to a level and suck out the inflammation with these plaques so that these plaques never rupture. And if they don't rupture, they're not a problem. So we really are embarking on a brand new approach to be able to right the ship in a disease that for the past century has literally been the leading cause of death for men and women worldwide. And I think that I like to say we are doing this not only through therapeutic lifestyle intervention, like recommending diet and exercise and stress management and good sleep and smoking cessation, and I can go on and on, but also being able to reverse the vascular aging clock back to where people did not have atherosclerotic disease in their arteries. It's like cleaning out the pipes. And this is an approach, I believe, and in what I outlined in my book, a stepwise approach on how to do this and what levels of cholesterol and other blood particles that we measure that you need to get to in order to be successful of shrinking these plaques so that they don't end up causing heart attacks, strokes, peripheral vascular catastrophes.
I know that the life expectancy in the United States has been steadily going up. I did see something where the life expectancy of the average American in 1960 was only about 67 years old. And now it seems the life expectancy is into the 80s for men and women. I think women are a couple of years more than men. On the other hand, from what it seems like you're saying, we have not decreased the risk of heart attacks, at least not until fairly recently. So people are living longer, but they're still dying off at the same rate, yeah?
Well, it's interesting because the American Heart Association, we have clinical research that have shown that since the advent of these statin medications that I talked about, as well as certain lifestyle interventions like stopping cigarette smoking and getting rid of trans fats and reducing the amount of saturated fats in our diet, that we started to see, starting from the 1950s and beyond, a progressive decrease in the number of cardiovascular deaths each year, up until about 4 or 5 years ago, when all of a sudden the curves flattened and they started going back up again. So we started seeing an increase in the number of heart attacks and strokes And the reason is, why is that? Well, clearly we have an obesity epidemic in the United States. More and more people are overweight or obese. That is associated with insulin resistance and diabetes. And when you have insulin resistance and diabetes, you significantly increase your risk of heart attacks. In addition to that, more and more people are not as active as they should be. We have a very sedentary society. We have a term which we use as sitting time. How many hours a day do people sit without moving, without physical activity? And we know that's a significant factor. So even though we have made great strides, we have some of the best interventional techniques today with stents, with bypass surgery, with various techniques where we could feed catheters into the brain, the blood flow, the blood vessels in the brain, and do what's called endovascular treatment of acute strokes. But all those things are reactive, and it means that not everybody we're not going to be able to successfully prevent an adverse outcome in people with strokes, nor are we going to be able to successfully win this battle in people with heart attacks by putting in stents and doing bypass surgery. We need to get at the problem before it happens.
Right.
Because prevention will always trump intervention. And I'm a strong proponent of intervention when it's needed. And when you're in the throes of a heart attack, I'd be the first one to say that our interventional techniques save lives. But it's not for every Tom, Dick, and Harry or Mary, Jane, and Susan walking down the street who happens to maybe have a blockage in one of the artery but having no symptoms. Now we have the ability to shrink these plaques and basically keep people out of the hospital, out of the cath lab, out of the operating room, and I think that's a huge advance. I cannot underestimate the value of lifestyle intervention. And a recent study, I think, was very, very important because it looked at, we still have hunter-gatherers on this planet. And there is a group of hunter-gatherers in the Bolivian Amazon called the Tsimami tribe. And these people, literally, they eat from the earth and they eat from the sea. They're constantly active, chasing down animals, fishing, getting herbs and plants, there's no processed food. And they did what's called coronary calcium scans, which are to look whether or not there's these atherosclerotic plaques built up. And believe it or not, there was very, very few people who had a speck of calcium. Most of them did not, because they had a lifelong approach of regular exercise, optimal diet, and this approach of going down this route really was keeping them from developing heart attacks and strokes. And I think that's really what we would optimally like for people to be able to do, is to have a healthy lifestyle so as they don't need to undergo caths or bypass surgery or even have to go on medications if they don't need it. And let me make a comment about medications, because a lot of people say, I don't want to be on medications. I want to do things natural. And I agree with that. That's great. But if you're walking around with elevated cholesterol levels, despite the fact that you're, in quotes, doing everything natural, you're still putting yourself at risk of a heart attack or a stroke. And your blood vessels really don't care where that cholesterol is coming from, whether it's coming from hereditary risk factors or whether it's coming from a flawed lifestyle. It's going to develop this atherosclerotic plaque that can rupture and kill you. So really what I think the winning strategy is to start early in life with a healthy lifestyle and then use not only the ultrasound imaging that we have, but also blood testing, which you measure what we call biomarkers, and one I talked about, which is LDL cholesterol. So let's just talk about a young adult, 25 years old, feels perfectly fine, but he's walking around with an elevated LDL cholesterol. And he may or may not have risk factors. He may have a family history of heart disease or whatever. We know that if we could get these young people, the LDL cholesterol reduced to lower levels than we've gotten to before, that we can significantly reduce their risk of developing a heart attack, whether it be 5 years later, 10 years later, or 20 years later. You don't want to have a heart attack, because it then triggers an entire approach, which is you're going to be spending a lot of your time in cardiac cath labs and operating rooms, and people don't want that. They want to be active. They want to be with their family and friends. They don't want to be doing these tests all the, and the best way of doing that is a prevention approach. And that's what I've outlined in my book, and I feel that this is going to be the winning strategy. And for those people that can't control their LDL cholesterol with a lifestyle approach, fortunately, we have very good and very safe medications that could be utilized. And my approach is not to put people on medications for the rest of their life. So if you have somebody, whether they're 22 years old or 62 years old, if you have somebody whose cholesterol levels and other parameters are too high, my approach has always been to get those levels down to the levels that we know can cause a shrinkage or regression of those dangerous plaques. And once we achieve that, I like to see if we can maintain that just with a good, healthy lifestyle. And if we can, then let's say they're able to go 10 years and then they either develop recurrent plaques that we could see on an ultrasound or an X-ray, or they develop a high cholesterol level, then we retreat them. But it's not saying to people, we're going to put you on medications for the rest of your life. I would much rather say to people, let's have you live a healthy lifestyle. Let's have you eat the proper diet, which the problem in the United States, and worldwide for that matter, is that much of our food is highly processed.
Yes.
It's processed with all kinds of things that you should not be consuming, from trans fats to salt to sugar. Exercise is another big thing. Smoking cessation. I mean, I could go right on down this list. Pollution, sleep quality. I outline all of these things on how to maintain this healthy lifestyle and not end up having to be not only in the cath labs and operating rooms, but also how to not have to take medications for the rest of your life. And for those that need to, because they have a hereditary risk that allows their cholesterol to be higher than we like, we have, again, very, very excellent medications that have been shown to be safe and effective. And the name of the game with all of this is to allow people to live a long, happy, and heart-healthy life.
Well, I think on that note, we do need to wrap up the interview. Very informative, Doctor. Thank you very much. Do you have a website that you want to give out where people can check out the book?
So my website is drozner.com. That's drozner.com. And, my book is on all the bookstores, and it's on Amazon. And again, the name of the book is Heart Attacks Are Not Worth Dying For. And certainly my driving force is that we could take the leading cause of death and disability in the United States and reverse it. And I think that would be that's been my goal and inspiration for the last 3-4 decades.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing. I think that's something that people did not really know about. I'd never heard of it. So thank you for that. And best of luck with the book and your practice and everything you're doing.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on your show.
You're listening to Mr. Smooth and Savvy right here on the Douglas Coleman Show. We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
Douglas Coleman's Don't Do a Podcast is a dryly humorous rant about Douglas's pet peeve, the unrelenting torrent of podcasts hitting the web on a constant basis. As technology has put podcasting within the reach of anyone, many wholly unqualified people have taken the plunge. This witty polemic tries to persuade them from broadcasting their drivel using Douglas's brand of sarcastic humor. Now on Amazon, only 99 cents.
DJC Music and DJC Productions are pleased to announce a brand new website. We have started a listing website for radio show hosts as well as potential show guests. This is a meeting site where hosts and guests can come together. Show hosts can list their show and types of guests they're interested in booking. Potential guests can list their talents, bio, accomplishments, or anything they feel makes them an interesting radio show guest. There are no recurrent payments, only a one-time $5 listing fee. Your listing will stay up until you decide to cancel. Previous guests of The Douglas Coleman Show are welcome to submit their guest listing free of charge. Go to radiohostsandguests.com. That's radiohostsandguests.com.
Love coffee, huh? But wait a minute. It seems like every time you finish a cup of coffee, you get all of these side effects along with it. Heartburn, indigestion, upset stomach, acid reflux. As the world's first and only organic acid-free coffee, Tyler's Coffee is able to provide a healthier option in the solution for more than 100 million individuals who have sensitive stomachs or suffer from acid-related modalities. This is Tyler's acid-free coffee. Coffee without the consequences.
Hi, this is John Morgan, Production Supervisor for DJC Productions. And you're listening to The Douglas Coleman Show.
Okay, please welcome back to the Douglas Coleman Show, Jennifer Ann Gordon. Hi, Jennifer. How are you?
Hey, Douglas. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Thank you. Welcome back. As we were
Thank you for having me back. It's been a while.
Yeah, as we were just talking about, it was like 8 months ago, and you were on the VE show, the video edition, and you live in New Hampshire, yeah? Okay, I remember that.
New Hampshire, yeah.
I lived there for 20 years, and...
That's right.
Yeah.
We did talk about that.
Yeah, yeah. Where in New Hampshire do you live?
I'm just outside of Concord, so just outside of the state capital. I'm in a town called Allenstown, which is very well known for Bear Brook State Park, which is one of the largest state parks in New Hampshire. It was also a place where a serial killer dumped a lot of bodies back in the 80s. So It's both beautiful and scary.
And I also think that we got into a conversation about mental institutions. Was that you?
I'm sure we did, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. It definitely was me. Yeah. Because when I was on the show before, it was for my book, the Hotel series, From Daylight to Madness and When the Sleeping Dead Still Talk. And those took place in an atmosphere of a Victorian-era mental institution.
Yeah, those are always the creepiest ones. I always have a real fascination with that. I mean, there was something very... Well, on the one hand, it was sort of a hypocrisy, because on the one hand, they thought that they were just doing the most wonderful service for these people, and yet at the same time, it was barbaric what they were doing. Yet they looked at it as... Go ahead.
They looked at it... So the books that I wrote, the series is called the Hotel series because it was basically a place masquerading as a hotel. It was saying, this is where you can send your loved ones if they just, need a good rest just to get back on track. But mainly the people that were there were just kept, very, very drugged up. So, of course, they were resting. They were, being drugged day in and day out.
Well, not only the drugs, but then, if they had any more serious issues, electroshock therapy was starting at that point. I think lobotomies were starting in the 20s or 30s that they started that?
20s and 30s.
Oh,
yeah.
Scary stuff. I think we had mentioned the architecture. I think there was a bit of a fascination with, they built them so grandiose. They looked like...
Yes, the Kirkbride buildings especially. There's very few of those still standing, but Kirkbride architecture, he specialized in designing mental institutions and hospitals and things like that in order for the patients, again, to quote-unquote have the best care possible. And in theory, the buildings are lovely, and had they not become overcrowded or basically tuberculosis hospitals at the same time, it might have been a different story, because most of these buildings were very large, but they only technically were supposed to house, we'll say, 275 patients, but they normally would have at least 2,000 to 5,000 patients. So overcrowding was always a problem, made the conditions there so much worse.
Well, I think at some point society thought that any little ailment, from depression to anxiety to, well, back in those days, if you were homosexual, they would lock you up in there as well. If people showed...
Yeah, there's like this list that I read when I was doing my research for the books that I was on the show before with, the Hotel series. All of the reasons why, it was specifically why a woman would be put into a mental institution in the Victorian era. And it was everything from too much books, like she reads too much, she sleeps too much, she doesn't sleep enough. If she's been thrown off a horse was one. Obviously being a lesbian, definitely at the top of the list. Sleepwalking, loss of a child, like all of these things that are not mental problems. Reading too much is not a mental problem.
I would hope not. Yeah. I think a lot of us would be in trouble if
then I might be a very sick person.
Getting thrown off a horse. Now there's something. Considering in the Victorian age, most women rode side saddle. And that would be very difficult not to get thrown off a horse riding side saddle.
Exactly. I feel like if I was just sitting on a horse in side saddle, even if the horse wasn't moving, would have like a 90% chance of just falling off that horse.
Well, it's amazing that
especially because they were in like dresses
too,
like long flowing gowns.
It's amazing they could even ride like that, because your balance is not right. The weight distribution is completely wrong, the way that's set up. And I always admired those women because they had to be a better rider than the men. Yeah. In order to stay on the horse.
I think the corsets also helped with their posture a lot, so they could maybe hold themselves on the horse a little bit better because they had to be sitting up so straight.
I don't know. I always felt like they needed to tie, a 50-pound weight on the right side of the saddle, somewhere by the stirrup, just to balance the horse.
Yeah.
But, anyways. Okay. Well, now that we've done our catching up and we know who we are and what we talked about before, you've got a new book out, and I think that's why you're here. It's called Pretty Ugly. I'm looking at the cover. The cover is pretty intense. Why don't you just give us a synopsis of this book?
So Pretty Ugly, which just came out on Tuesday, is it's kind of genre bending. I think it's easiest to define it as literary horror or a literary modern gothic. It follows the story of two characters, Amelia, who is an Instagram influencer who had a tragic past, and a man named Sam, who is the heir apparent to a political dynasty. He is running for the governor of the state of Massachusetts, and he gets embroiled into a political scandal, a low-level political scandal. And the story follows these two people right as the world basically starts to end because of I hate to say virus, because it is a virus, but it's not about COVID. And the idea for the book came before COVID, so just maybe it's good timing or bad timing that we've all lived through this. But it follows these two people and how they deal with the fact that they've never lived the life that they always wanted to. and now the world may or may not be ending, and they may or may not be sick. I don't want to give too many spoilers. And it's a story about how to connect with people, how to forgive yourself, how to forgive the people that broke your heart when you were a kid. And so it takes place in the United States, and then the second half of the book takes place in Italy, and it's getting really great reviews. I'm excited.
Oh, good. Well, that's good. How many books have you written now?
This is my fourth, but the hotel series, my second and third books, were both quite short. They're really like basically two novellas, and they go together. So it's 4 books technically are out, but really it's about 3 books worth of material.
You'll forgive me if this sounds like an oddball question, but I did get a great answer from several people on it, and I'm just making a comparison between authors because I do interview many, many authors on this show. How long is the book? How many words?
Pretty Ugly is, I believe, 94,000 words.
94,000 words. Okay.
And, yeah.
And how long did it take you to write it?
I don't know. About 6 months, perhaps. It was pretty fast.
6 months.
It was pretty. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
I know there's some people that like can pump out books like once a month, but that's not the style of how I write. Sometimes like the first draft can come out in like four months, but then that's just the first draft.
Okay, well that's interesting because the last person that I asked that question to said that they wrote 88,000 words, which is pretty much in the same realm as yours, in 2 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah, there are people that honestly, like I have, acquaintances in the indie writing community. They tend to write series of books. A lot of times it's like paranormal or romance. And they write full-length novels in 2 or 3 weeks. And I wish I could do that. My brain doesn't work that way. If I write 3,000 words in a day, I get like brain fatigue. I have to rest. And I don't know if that's because I write some really kind of emotionally draining work. It's like emotionally draining for me. If I was writing something lighter, maybe I could write faster. I don't know.
Well,
I have all the power to people that can write that fast.
Are all of your stories from personal experience? And maybe that's why you get fatigued, because you're kind of reliving something that you went through or you thought?
Yeah, they're not. I mean, everything I've been writing is it's all fiction, but I would be a liar if I didn't say there are aspects of me in every one of my characters, even the bad characters. And I think because I write literary and because I write dark fiction or more on the horror side of things, I deal a lot with grief and trauma. And even if it's not something that I've personally gone through, I think it does take something out of me emotionally to put that much thought and care into creating a character that's gone through something really heartbreaking.
Okay, so
maybe that's why it takes a lot out of me.
Well, that's possible. So let's say you sit down, you write 3,000 words. Then, brain fatigue sets in. So then what do? Do you go out for a walk?
Oh, sometimes I go out for a walk. Sometimes I'll read. I exercise a lot. Sometimes I just play with my dogs for a little while. So there's never a time in the day that I don't have things to do. And I feel like with writing too, there's always something to do to promote yourself. Like right now I'm here on a podcast. I do a lot of podcasts. I host a couple podcasts. So there's always something that is involved in my career. And I do have a day job. I don't work the day job during the summer. So it's been a nice little break from having to do too many things.
Is there a particular task that you do, like you said, playing with the dog or going for a walk, or that you get into that frame of mind where the story starts to write itself, where you get into that creative space? Because a lot of people that I've talked to say that creative space isn't happening for them when they're actually writing. The ideas have to be formulated doing something else, and then as soon as they get it in their head, then they sort of run to the computer and say to get it down, or they'll dictate it into a little recording device or something.
It happens both ways for me. There are times that I'm right about to fall asleep at night, and you get that like brainstorm of, I know how to end this chapter, and I'll just grab my phone real quick and just like text myself some notes. But other times, I think where the characters go, sometimes I don't know where they're going to go until I'm writing them, and then things happen. So I think for me, it goes both ways. But I do, like, I'm at a part in my current work in progress that I got to a place where I knew I'm at 70,000 words, and I'm headed into that like final act of the book. And there's two ways it can go. It can go like traditionally in a certain way, or I can do like a really crazy twist. And the twist excited me, but so I kind of stepped back from that project and started working on something else. But like that, my work in progress is in the back of my head, and like every day I get like a little bit closer. I'm like, I think I know how to make that twist really work. Whereas, a week ago I was just like, I have this idea for a twist, but I don't know if it's even possible. And even just today, before we got on this interview, I was thinking about it. I was, daydreaming, staring out the window, and I thought of, how to make it work. So I think sometimes writing isn't writing. Sometimes writing is staring out the window. Sometimes writing is doing your dishes.
Exactly. Part of the writer's process is staring out the window, I think.
Yeah, and sometimes and I'll tell people, I'm like, they'll say, like, did you write today? And I'll say, well, I opened up my document and I poked around at the words, and I spent a lot of time like dreaming it. And maybe I wrote a couple hundred words, and then other days it's there, the words are there, and it flows. I tend to write at least something every day. I do a lot of early morning free writing, and like I work based on like writing prompts and things like that. A lot of personal essays that I just do to explore who I am as a writer, who I am as a person. Sometimes little things that pop up into a personal essay, like one line of that, I think, my character, that relates to them too. So
let me ask you something about a thing that I've been seeing more authors doing. But let me preface this with an example. Years ago, the major Hollywood studios tried an experiment with films where they would have select people come in for a screening, and they would offer you two different endings to the movie, and they would vote on which ending the people preferred. Okay? It was a complete disaster, and it didn't last very long at all. I've seen several authors now doing the same thing, where they're trying to engage their audience by saying, okay, I'm at this point. Now it's the home stretch. I've got two ways that this can go, and they'll present both ways to their followers, whoever, and they're voting on which one the people like. Now, I have sort of mixed feelings about doing that, but what do you think?
It's not something I would do because, honestly, I don't really talk about the book I'm writing too much too early. Sometimes I can't do it because of spoiler reasons. Right now, the work in progress that I'm working on, my agent, Paula Munier from Talcott Notch, she, has me under like lock and key. She's like, you cannot talk about this idea to anybody. We don't want this leaking at all.
Right.
So it's, so I've never asked my audience's opinion on an ending, especially, I do have beta readers that I'm not using them currently right now because I can't, but I've always had a group of beta readers in the past, and I'll ask them, like if things are working in general, but I would never say I have these two endings, which one would be stronger. Like I'd ask my agent that, or sometimes I'd ask my husband that, but I wouldn't put it out personally for me into the public, because I think especially the style of book I write and how I write, I just wouldn't want any of my possible endings to get out there.
Well, I agree with you. I certainly wouldn't do that with anything I do, because it's my creation.
Whoa.
Maybe I'm selfish, but it's my creation.
No, but
this is it. You know?
I do see it a lot. You know, there's a lot of writing communities online, and people will say, like, I have an idea for, I'm just going to like make something up, a werewolf detective story. What should I name the detective, and what should the crime be? And people are like, hundreds of responses of like, if I was writing that, I'd do this. And I'm like, you're giving this person like a complete synopsis for a book, and you like don't.
Well, exactly. I mean,
let the writer write. And I don't want to say that writers shouldn't be doing that, but to me, it's a little baffling.
Yeah, I don't think.
It might make things easier if I could just take a poll and be like, how should I end my book? But I feel like it would be like a cheat.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. It's like you're farming the work out to somebody else.
I know. Like, you might as well just hire a ghostwriter.
Yeah, exactly right. And that's a whole nother realm of discussion, because I've always thought about ghostwriting as something that, I don't know, it's perfectly acceptable in the literary world. It's been for centuries. But it only applies to certain aspects of writing. Like, you cannot hire a ghostwriter to write your thesis for you, for your doctorate.
Right.
That would be considered plagiarism. You cannot hire a ghost singer to sing on your song and say that that's you singing. You'll get banished from the kingdom like Milli Vanilli did. And but you can pay somebody to write a book for you and put your name on it, and the person who actually wrote it, their name's nowhere to be found. And that's perfectly acceptable. So I always find that kind of intriguing.
Yeah, it is strange. And I have good friends who are ghostwriters, and some of them who are professional ghostwriters won't ghostwrite fiction. They'll only ghostwrite, like, quote unquote autobiographies for people. Like, we'll say people in the sports industry, or sometimes, politicians, or people who aren't creative writers. So I have a good friend who, that's how he makes his living, is writing strictly sports autobiographies.
That's probably okay.
That that's fine. And I know some people who do a lot of like business books, like how to succeed in business, and they're writing it under the name of like somebody who's actually very successful in business. And that I can understand, but I don't know. I think I would never be able to be a ghostwriter. I would just want the credit so badly, especially if it became like a bestseller.
Oh, yeah.
I'd be like,
yeah,
that's me. But then again, there's very famous ghostwriters. Andrew Niderman, who wrote The Devil's Advocate, he has been the ghostwriter for V.C. Andrews for the last, 40 years almost. And everybody knows he's the ghostwriter.
Well, that kind of defeated the purpose, didn't it?
Yes, it did. But V.C. Andrews passed away, and people knew there was a ghostwriter. But then there was a lawsuit of some kind, and he had to come out and publicly say, it's me.
That's crazy. Jennifer, we got to wrap this up. We are out of time. Do you have a website that you want to give out for the new book?
Yes, I do. The easiest place to find my new book, Pretty Ugly, as well as the rest of my work and anything you might want to know about me, is on my website, which is www.jenniferannegordon.com, and that's ANNE Gordon.com. That has links to everything. And if people want to buy autographed copies of my book, Pretty Ugly, those can be purchased through GibsonsBookstore.com. They do ship. Those books are autographed, and it would be great.
Well, thanks for coming back on this show. It was nice talking to you again. And
thank you, Douglas. It was great to be here.
Best of luck with the new book.
Thank you.